We need to stop this. Stop what? We need to stop measuring trauma. You know why? Because there's no such thing as little trauma. I came across an article today by a therapist who said those exact words. There's no such thing as little trauma. I felt so validated because there's out there in the psychology world, they have this thing called big T and little t trauma. I find that very upsetting. Even though I do understand why they're doing that in their circles. They're measuring a trauma exposure. They're measuring the circumstance. They're measuring the situation kind of thing. Because, you know, a tsunami is not the same thing as your basement flooded. Those are two different kinds of situations. They are. So if you want to measure the situation, I get that. But we need to stop measuring trauma. Because trauma is not the situation. Trauma is not the trauma exposure. Trauma is what happens inside of a person where we can't see it. It's invisible to our eyeballs unless we know what it looks like when it's working its way out in the trauma responses and reactions and choices in ways that it affects us. Because trauma is inside of a person. There is no little trauma. Trauma is a wound. It's an involuntary wound, and we need to stop measuring it. But why? Because when we measure it, and theirs is bigger, they have a big T, I have a little t, so mine doesn't matter. Wrong. Your trauma matters. My trauma matters. Anyone who's suffering trauma, trauma matters. And when we dismiss it, we suffer. It gets worse. Trauma even kills people when we don't deal with it. It festers. It gets worse. So we need to stop measuring it. We need to become trauma informed. We need to find out what's going on. Where did it come from? How did it happen? How is it affecting me? And deal with it. You know, I really learned this thing that there is no little trauma, though I didn't have those same words when I was writing my book, Emerging with Wings. And God gave me this quote that's gone all over the place that I want to share with you because it is powerful and so true. It starts with 3 words. Trauma is personal. Trauma is personal. Your trauma, my trauma, that's not the same. 2 people can go through the exact same thing and come out vastly different on the other side. Trauma is personal. And trauma is a wound. There is no little thing that wreaked havoc on the inside of you. The quote goes, trauma is personal. It does not disappear if it is invalidated. If it is not validated, excuse me. I'm going to start over again. Trauma is personal. It does not disappear if it is not validated. When it is ignored or invalidated, the silent screams continue, internally heard only by the one held captive. When someone enters the pain and hears the screams, healing can begin. We need to validate it. And when we measure trauma, we invalidate it. We make it less than. And then we don't do anything about it. And I love you. I'm Danielle Bernock, that lady on the internet who loves you. From DanielleBernock.com, I want you to love yourself from survive to thrive. So I want to connect you to the love that heals, because love heals. We need love. And that's what mitigates trauma. That's what heals it out of us, is love. So I show up and I always tell you, I love you. And stop measuring your trauma. Stop measuring someone else's trauma if you've been doing that. Trauma is trauma, and it needs to be addressed. It needs to be healed for you to live your life to the fullest. I love you. God loves you. And I want you to know how much you matter. And please, stop measuring trauma in your life or anyone else's, and pass it on. Pass this message on to others to stop measuring trauma, because it will never go away when we do that and diminish it and we pretend it didn't happen because it's not as bad as someone else's. So until next time, I love you.